world war could happen. History has not ended. We live in an age of nationalism. No one's going to cooperate. I mean, look at Putin in Ukraine. Look at the United States. So we tried to dominate Afghanistan, and that didn't work out. So we think we're going to dominate all of Latin America. It is so wealth reducing. Russia and China are eternal neighbors. They're not eternal friends. They have been their worst enemies over the years. Imperialism is not the way to go. My impression, my understanding of Xi Jinping and his whole cohort, they're engineers. And this is the great gift of China to the world.
We likely get 10 years of chaos with nukes. This is the risk, right?
Well, I love the name Vladivostok. Vladi, rule, Vostok, the East. And there's Vladikavkaz.
This interview is based on questions from our viewers. Leave your questions in the comments for the next Q&A with Sarah Paine.
What's the biggest difference between Russian and Chinese imperial models? Having vassals?
No, I mean, the continental thing about, there's much in common with that. I would say that China's had a really strong commercial tradition forever. That you go back to the Roman Empire and the Silk Road's up and running, and it's all about people in Europe in those days.
You mean running business?
No, it's China. It's also having state-of-the-art manufacturers. Back in the day, that was silks and porcelains. And I would imagine in your apartment or house, whatever you've probably got some Chinese appliances that are pretty good. If certainly most Americans do, that they have this really vibrant commercial tradition, always have. Russia never has. Russia has always been about shaking people down for money, right? So that's why you move into places and then you take away their resources, and then you funnel it all to St. Petersburg or Moscow, wherever your capital is. That's very Russian, right? And think about during the whole Cold War, Russia was the poor place, Eastern Europe was the rich place, and Russians are just extracting resources from Eastern Europe. And they say, oh, but we gave them all the oil. And it's like, you got so much more back in return. Whereas I think China is not extractive in that way. I'm thinking about it on short notice.
Don't you think that essence of their imperial models is having vassals? Like, for Russia, Belarus, for China with Burma?
Well, China has this, there's a parallel that the Chinese want to run everything out of Beijing, and then you have bilateral relations. And then the Chinese will just say it overtly that, hey, we're big, you're small, so just do what you're told, right? And that is very much their attitude. And the Russians seem to take over people, they want physical domination with their military in there. And maybe part of it has to do with the geography that China, the Han expanded and about as far as you could until the mountains reached, right? And then Russia used to be strong. So there's a great question of what Siberia's fate is in all of this. Right, all that territory that went away. I can picture one ending to the Ukraine war where China gains a lot of territory in return for putting the screws on Russia to end things in the West. I can picture that as one ending. Russians won't like that.
You've written on the collapse of the Qing and the Soviets.
Yeah.
How would China collapse play out?
Poorly, as they all do. I think when no one believed in Confucianism anymore and the army staged a coup, that was it. And so then there is no central government, it's gone. And then you have the leader of that army, Yuan Shikai, trying to become the new leader, and then he tries to install himself as emperor, except someone probably put something in his breakfast because he dies. There's a whole succession of Chinese leaders who die suddenly, and you wonder what someone fed them. But what you have are all the rural power holders, what become known as warlords, doing private armies, and it goes on for years.
If the China collapses, we don't get a democracy.
No. If China collapses, if China goes into a civil war...
We likely get 10 years of chaos with nukes, I think.
No one knows the answer to that question. It depends how, why,
but
whatever.
This is the risk, right?
This is what Chinese, I believe, and again, it's a guess, because there are an awful lot of them to guess about, but I think their great fear, if given their history of the 19th century just being a disaster of civil wars, and then it continues with all the warlord stuff, because that's other civil wars. And by the way, don't dismiss them. These warlord wars have hundreds of thousands of belligerents. It's World War I style warfare. It's really ugly. And then you have the whole thing with Japan. The thing that Chinese, I believe, the Han agree they don't want, is chaos. Luan is their word for it. These horrible years of interregnum between political systems, they don't want that. So watch them put a premium on stability over liberty, because they don't want chaos.
So we likely get 10 years of chaos.
I don't know you're going to go directly from Xi Jinping to chaos. That seems like quite a binary. There are many steps in all of that, but there's a fear in China of chaos. And democracy, you keep asking about the rules-based order. It's always a work in progress. It takes thousands of years, as did the development of democracy, long time. So it's human beings trying to forge their way forward to make something a little better.
Does Beijing look at Vladivostok the way Moscow looks at Crimea?
Well, I love the name Vladivostok. Vladi, rule, Vostok, the east. And there's Vladikavkaz, rule the Caucasus. And there was a Tsargrad, Constantinople, the Tsar's city. Oh, if you get into the Russian terminology for place names, we own it all.
Because you speak Russian, right?
Poorly, yes. Yes, and it's very rusty. I haven't had a chance to practice, but I read it. Ah, yes. Those Vladivostok, that was Manchu land. And this is why I tell you, the problem with going to war is the territorial rules then don't apply to the war settlement. And you can lose a lot of territory. And you lose a lot of wealth, guaranteed, by going to war. But then you can lose your own territory, and that may happen to Vlad the Bad. No one's going to shed too many tears for him. But then it might give China precisely the resources it needs to cause problems elsewhere.
Does China have to grab territory if it can control it through credit?
I have no idea how all of that works. You're getting way beyond my expertise, but I would think that what you're talking about would certainly be if you wanted to take it over territorially, those would be your first steps, is do all the things you're talking about. And then the territory, since Russia does have nuclear weapons, you would have to have the Russians pretty well cornered, where Vladimir Putin thinks he's about to be a done man in order to cede things to China in return for whatever it's going to be.
Okay, so from the point of your expertise, how did this sort of empire building looks historically?
It's bloody. Historically, it's the way the great empires of Eurasia ran business. You're always fighting on the borders and you're absorbing the people on your borders. You get bigger and bigger and bigger until you overextend, and that probably it helps explain the implosions over the course of Russia's and China's long and bloody histories. It takes too much, and all of a sudden the neighbors get you, or just your own internal decline, right? If you're running with a bunch of dictators, or you got a dynasty, right? Dynasties, that is not a meritocracy. You just take the idiot kid of the last one.
Who could do to America today what the oil embargo did to Japan?
Oh, I think it's just simply the boycotting of American goods. And it's already hurting. In New England, Canadians are not coming here for their vacations. There are a lot of businesses that are hurt.
Could you image Europe joining with China for this boycott?
I don't see Europe joining with China. China's a problem for Europe. But I can see lots of countries for independent reasons wanting to cause the United States problems. You really need friends in this world. And dispensing with all of our friends is just, it's crazy. You will need them because crises do happen. History has not ended. A world war could happen. And then you will need friends. Instead of going alone, it won't work.
Do we need Americans as a European?
Does Europe need America? Yeah, Europe would love to have, I'm understanding this, would love to have the old version of America. But apparently we've got a new version. And the question is this new version permanent? And then it goes back to, I don't know how the November elections are going to turn out. Whether there's going to be, I don't know whether there's anyone in the Republican Party who is willing to act as statespeople. Not of who's going to win this immediate election, but setting up a world in which our children will prosper. And the current one's not the case.
Is there the fundamental difference between Russia and Chinese bureaucratic systems?
I'm not a fan of monocausal explanations of just, oh, there's one thing that explains everything. I don't know. Russia and China are eternal neighbors. They're not eternal friends. In fact, they have been their worst enemies over the years. My undergraduate degree, I had a major field was Russian history. My minor field was Chinese history. And I got into Russia as a young person. I'd heard about how evil the Russians were in the Cold War, and then talk about life's uncertainties. I assumed that because Russia had been a big deal, it would always be a big deal. And so when you're asking me about certainties, about what's going to be next year, so here I am entering graduate school in '82, and it's like a 9-year PhD because I did so much language work in Japan, China, and Russia. And then, of course, the Soviet Union implodes and it's no longer a sure bet for a career, but that's a whole other thing. So I did Russia as my major field, China as my minor field. And then I learned about whether Ronald Reagan was right about evil empire. It certainly was evil, and it certainly was an empire. And I thought, Ronald Reagan, he had the right words, too. It's very efficient, describes exactly what they were. And it was a lot worse than I had imagined. And then learning about China, and they're really, I remember going down to the library when I was trying to figure out my dissertation topic. So I'm looking at all the Chinese books on Russian history. I was just curious. And in Chinese books, they often have the same title for all of them. It's like the general history of China, the general history of China, general history of China, just all of them. And the books all have the same title, whether they were published under the Qing dynasty, in the Republican period in between, in Taiwan, or by the communists. And it was a history of Russian aggression in China. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. Chinese don't like these people. Wonder what that's all about. And then I did a history of their border from the Opium Wars, it was really 1858 to 1924 when Mongolia is detached. And that's where I learned the fun statistic about Russia taking more territory than U.S. east of Mississippi from the Chinese sphere of influence. It comes from the dissertation. So I learned about that. And then I realized I had to learn more about Japan because it's really that triangle that's fighting all about, this is Japan's neighborhood, right? So it's China, that is a triangular set of relations. And then that exhausted me, so.
Do the Chinese actually plan the generations ahead? Or is that a Western category error?
Oh, long-term planning. The question, if I understand it, is whether the Chinese are really good long-term strategic thinkers and whether Westerners are really short-term. Okay, let's look at the data on that one. If that's the case, if you look at how many Chinese died in the 20th century and how many of them died it's Han Chinese deaths at the hands of other Han Chinese. So a mark of good strategy would be not killing your own, correct?
Yeah.
Under Mao, just under good old Mao, more Chinese died than I keep coming back to the statistic, all deaths in World War II. And the key event, apart from all his purges of rightist campaigns and 100 flowers that are going to bloom and the 100 flowers that are going to be cut, whatever, all his different campaigns, he introduces the Great Leap Forward, which causes the Great Famine, in which 40 million Chinese die. Okay, let's look at statistics before you accept that. Yang Jisheng, you can look it up, wrote a book called Tombstone, And he was a journalist for many years in China that gave him access to provincial archives. He wrote a 3-volume book in Chinese, it's 1 volume in English, and that's where the stats come from. And he was investigating the deaths that took the life of his father. So you're telling me the Chinese are so clever and they starved to death 40 million of their own. I don't think so. Let's look at it a completely different way. Is that I'm guessing, because with dictators you guess, and then you have a hypothesis, and then you look at the facts as they come in, and as the facts come in and you're wrong, you change your hypothesis. My hypothesis is that the Chinese Communist Party wants to maintain a monopoly of power. That's the big goal. And then we'll watch over time whether I seem to be right or wrong. And if that is the case, it explains all the crackdowns and that are very wealth reducing. And so that would be, and that's all about he may have long-term thinking about that, Xi Jinping, I have no idea, but focusing on that one, I suspect that's what's truly going on in China. And also, if they're doing long-term thinking, why do you ever want to take Taiwan? Really, it's, what is it, 1/250th of Chinese territory and extent, and it's got a bunch of Taiwanese who have an attitude. Just trade with them. This is the miracle of the trade system. Let everyone have their dysfunctional domestic politics so you don't have to deal with it, and you just trade with them and make money that way. The moment you try to own it, you own the people's the loaded diaper is yours. The moment you do that. We live in an age of nationalism. No one's going to cooperate. I mean, look at Putin in Ukraine. The Latin Americans are not going to cooperate with us. There are hundreds of millions of them. There are too many of them. Look at the United States. So we tried to dominate Afghanistan, population, whatever it is 30 million or something, and it's like medieval, and that didn't work out. So we think we're going to dominate all of Latin America. It is so wealth reducing. Imperialism is not the way to go. Dictators like it because then they justify dictatorial rule and they get to tell everybody what to do.
What about the new Long March, taking Taiwan by 2049 real strategy?
Oh, I think they really want Taiwan to be theirs, and I think that's probably a shared Chinese, Han Chinese aspiration. As for the Long March, I mean, the whole name Long March is propaganda, because that was the long route where the nationalists expelled the Chinese from South China, in which the communists lost 95% of their armed forces doing that one. So that's the long route. And it's great that they want to call it the Long March, and oh, aren't we special? Most people would regard that as a military disaster, but whatever.
Russia had a tradition of self-criticism. China used scapegoating.
Well, we're all scapegoating. Isn't that the age we're in right now? Everyone's blaming immigrants for this, that, and the other. You can see it in Europe as well. We're all saying it's other people's. I'm perfect, but someone else is doing something bad to me. This seems to be human. I think the cultural issue that's important to understand about China, or at least one of them that I know about, it's face. It's protecting your face. It's giving face. Like, I can, if you believe in face, I can give you face by pretending that I really respect you and acting as if you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? And that would be giving you face. Taking away face would be highlighting some error you've made, or just pretending you made one and then making it really public. The problem in China is face is the currency of power, so that if you lose face, it's permanent. And this is the problem in wars, is backing down for China. If the war starts, they'll have real trouble backing down. More trouble than Vladimir Putin, because of coming from a face society.
The Chinese policymakers think more like historians compared to Americans?
I have no idea how they think. My impression, my understanding of Xi Jinping and his whole cohort, they're engineers. Yeah. And so they're thinking about technical solutions. And so they've made all sorts of investments in, and this is the great gift of China to the world. So the United States is trying to say that green.
Putin for sure thinks like historian, by the way.
No. Hold on to the engineers.
Okay.
The engineers is all the green energy. China has no interest in maintaining an oil economy because it doesn't have oil. And so it's doing a lot of investments in battery and electric vehicles and all these things. And that's really important. It's important for if you care about climate change and all those things. So China is making all those investments. That's positive, and that's an engineering kind of solution. But as for, Xi Jinping did use historians. When he came to power, he immediately called in his historians who are experts on the Soviet Union, hauled them in. I kid you not, I think it was in 2013. And he asked them, and he said, why did the Soviet Union fall apart? And they told him, they said, well, it fell apart on ethnic lines because the Soviets like to maintain the fiction that all the nationalities love them, and they're the great creators of dictionaries and foreign language books. Russians have tons of those. And so they would like have the Kazakhs nominally running Kazakhstan, and they're all running around speaking local language and doing some different folk dances here and there. And then the Russians are actually in charge. But it meant when the Soviet Union collapsed, there were these discrete units so that it shattered on ethnic lines. And China's not going to do that. And I think that explains Xi Jinping's policy of genocide towards the Uyghurs. He doesn't want Xinjiang or Tibet breaking off as a distinct unit. And so in the case of Xinjiang, it's just you're putting all the Uyghur men in jail and kill them there, or they just die in jail. And then the children are brought up as Han Chinese. And in Tibet, they're flooding it with Han people.
What makes a power maritime versus continental?
Circle back to the beginning. There are only a few places that are islands and archipelagos who can actually defend themselves by sea, right? And only a few of those in history became great powers. There are just certain things that are really, China can have a big navy all at once, but it cannot. A maritime power has to be able to deploy its navy in peace and wartime, right? Otherwise, what good does it do you? So if you don't have direct access to the high seas, and not in some obscure place where there are only polar bears, but close to your productive base, you can't play the game, right? And you also need access to the world's resources and your allies, right? China cannot do that in wartime. It's just, unless all of its neighbors are part of its system and they all join and want to cooperate. Except I don't think the Vietnamese are going to cooperate well. I don't think the Filipinos are. I don't think the Japanese are. I don't think Taiwanese are. And if you look at these narrow island cluttered seas, navies have trouble deploying. Think about Germany. In World War II, they took the entire Norwegian coastline and the French coastline, and they still couldn't get their merchant marine out, but that was necessary for them to even get their submarines out, those big coastlines. Well, China has nothing like that. So if you're going to go into a big hot war, it will not get its merchant marine out. That's just not the case. So geography gives you certain...
Can be both maritime and continental at the same time?
You can't change your geography. So let's go to security paradigms. So forget about by the friends you choose and the institutions you support, so you're Poland, you're way in the Baltic Sea, you're never going to get your stuff out in wartime unless you're part of the EU, they're all friends, and then there's no problem. You just send it by train. Or if your friends are all on all sides of the Baltic, you're going to get all your things out, and it's maritime.
How would you classify Europe today?
It's maritime. It's a maritime security framework. It's your continental powers, they don't cooperate well with each other. It's about trading with the world. I mean, Europe is one of the greatest centers of trade that humanity's ever known.
Tell me something more. Is it a political choice to be maritime or pure geographical fact?
Japan decided it was going to be continental and ruined itself in World War II. It's an island. That means it's inherently separated from the theater, the mainland theater. And so Japan was going to dominate all this territory. Well, when the locals protested, that did not work well. Right? Geography is immutable, but by the friends you choose, this is why I say maritime world order. If you stick with it, of forming alliances with other like-minded powers, you can have a maritime security framework. Doesn't make Poland an island, but Europe's a peninsula.
Why did Meiji Japan succeed where Qing China failed?
Okay, there are numerous reasons, and I'll never manage to remember the complete list. But already you have China, which has reached the limits to growth, and not of population growth, but of how much food it can produce, and it's suffering in the early 19th century of people trying to farm lands that are not suitable for farming. They don't get enough rain, or they're too vertical. Then you get all sorts of famine, good rain one year, famine the next. You get massive soil erosion, so you can grow even less. And so then you have a whole series of civil wars that I've already discussed with you. And if you think about the quantity of these civil wars and the number of provinces that were devastated, you go, oh, I have no doubts why China was having a harder time, right? And then on top of this, you have Manchu minority rule, which the Manchus, only 2% of the population, one of the ways they ruled was pretending that everything they did was in conformity with Han, that's the preponderant ethnic group in China, Han Confucian traditions. So for them to do radical reforms is dangerous because there are only 2% of them. And then, as I mentioned before, when they finally do the reforms, the first thing the unified military does is overthrow them. So there are all those things going on. And there's another piece which relates to Japan. So when China is defeated in the Sino-Japanese War, the first one, 1894-95, it just detonates the Confucian bedrock of Chinese thinking. Because under Confucianism, there's only one civilization. It's China's. Everybody else is an assortment of barbarians, because China had been at the forefront of human achievement of all areas, which is true. It was for a long, long time. But when the Japanese take a U-turn on the road to civilization and they trade in Confucianism for Westernization, it detonates the bedrock of Confucianism. And so then the Chinese no longer believe in the bedrock of who they are. That's another contributor to why the Qing imploded. And you can think about a parallel to this at the end of the Soviet Union. Russians no longer believed in communism. Gorbachev's generation is looking at it going, we need to reform it, that its current iteration just doesn't work. Well, if everyone ceases believing, the world as you know it can disappear. So that's the China story. Now for the Japan story. So Japan is used to emulating others. They had emulated Chinese institutions for centuries and centuries. So it isn't a new thing to emulate others. And then they watch China being defeated in the Opium Wars, and they're going, oh gosh, we're going to be next. And they were. This is when Commodore Perry, an American, brings his black ships, as they're called in Japan, in 1854, does some gunboat diplomacy and forces the Japanese to sign a treaty. And that's one of the reasons the Tokugawa shogunate is going to be overthrown, because it's just disgraced itself by signing this treaty with these awful people, the Americans. And so the Japanese are thinking, we're going to be next. And they're watching China being divided up into all kinds of spheres of influence. And they think, okay, we're going to figure out the nature of the problem. So then they go and have these year-long fact-finding missions going to Europe and the United States, where they're studying not only military institutions, but also civil institutions. So they were very impressed by American one-room schoolhouses, of how you educate people in a big country. They're really impressed by the British Navy, and they're terribly impressed by Bismarck, who is completing the unification of the Germanic states under Prussian hegemony, because the main mission, the Iwakura mission, comes in 1871, and that's as the Franco-Prussian War is ending. And they're very impressed with the German army and things, and also the German political structure. And what they're concluding is, unlike the Chinese, who tried to, in their self-strengthening movement, which was to get all the military hardware and technology in order, where this is going to go back to institutions in your question. And they did that, and it just failed. The Japanese are going, yeah, we need to do the modernization part, getting these state-of-the-art technology But in order to be able to be an independent creator of it, we've got to emulate some parts of Western institutions, what I would call Westernization, and they do it. So between the Iwakura mission in 1894, they westernized all these institutions, which I've mentioned with you already, political, economic, educational, legal, whatever I've missed, everything. And then they signed treaty revision with the British. So these unequal treaties where Westerners are treated according to Western laws in Asia, but not vice versa, and they're setting tariff rates and things in Asia, but not vice versa. That all goes. And Japan has got its equal treaty in, and that's the next year when it goes off and fights the Sino-Japanese war to expel China from Korea. So the Japanese concluded that in order to become a great power, that you couldn't just try to get the fruits of the garden of modernization. You needed the garden in which the fruits come from, and that would be Westernization.
So what role did eliminating internal enemies play?
Illuminating in Japan?
Yeah.
Well, there was a brief civil war, and there's another piece to it. So there's a brief, let's get it straight. Japan had shogunates. Shogun means general. The Tokugawa shogunate is one thing. The imperial line has been uninterrupted. So there is a civil war, very brief. It overthrows the last Tokugawa shogun, who steps down, calls it a day. And unlike the Manchus, who try to cling to power. But then the mid-level samurai who take over, they're going to use the Emperor Meiji, and call it a restoration of imperial rule, which it wasn't. I mean, the emperor has always been there, and they've always reigned, not ruled. They're a symbol of legitimacy. And then, because everybody's Japanese and no one's like Manchus, they can do these massive changes without being overthrown, because they come from this tiny minority ethnic group. So they are in the position to do these major reforms, and they do.
I will give you some Russian surnames: Khrushchev, Brezhnev.
You told me they're Ukrainian.
Khrushchev was Ukrainian, Brezhnev from Donbass. So
yeah,
you're
he's
right.
a Russian family that moved there.
Yeah, you'll get point. You're right. Does imperial core experience teach a country to think like a great power?
I don't know. Isn't it also how we educate our children on what we tell them about themselves?
Does it, maybe explain why Kyiv plays great power politics better than Warsaw, better than my country?
Oh, I don't know, but I'm going to give you in fact, I'm going to give you a hypothesis, but you actually understand Polish. Yeah, I don't know if this is how it works, but the Russians are really good, as far as I can tell, at understanding other people's psychology, and they understand why people dislike each other. They understand fractures in other societies, and their game is to feed both sides, and so that they fight with each other, and then the country weakens and they come on in. So with the various partitions of Poland, and particularly when, didn't you have like a unanimous rule thing for your governing body? It would be such a piece of cake for Russians to feed both sides in a fight. And you wonder, I don't know whether the documentary evidence is even available on that, of whether you would do that, and then Poland, because their Poles are all fighting with each other, that enables Russia to come in. But you can certainly see this where they're leveraging all the fake news, right? It's so hard to prove that, this meme came from Russia.
War, right?
Yeah, but it's very difficult to prove that this really clever meme is from Russia, and then some, what they call полезный дурак, the useful fool, which would be people who are sharing these memes all around. In the Cold War, the way Russian, it's just, what is it, disinformatia, right? Their disinformation.
The way they were the same, right? Desinformatia.
Yeah, the way they're trying to do it in the Cold War, this is prior to all the social media, is they would try to place it like in an African newspaper. Why Africa? Because those newspaper stories weren't particularly well vetted, and they would try putting a whole bunch of these things in, like that the United States is doing biological weapons in the Korean War, which we weren't. The fact is that they couldn't inoculate their people, and that's why they're all dying of disease. And then occasionally one of these articles would bubble up and be taken by the Western press, and then it might take on a life of its own. And then it'd be hard to disprove. Like, how do you disprove that you didn't do biological warfare in the Korean War? It's really hard to disprove, right? Even though you never did. So really difficult. Nowadays, it's like throwing spaghetti on the wall. You just see what sticks. On the social media, you can have some kid in Moscow coming up with a bunch of crazy memes, and then some of them take off.
And this is fully impactful.
It is.
It is.
It is. And what the answer during the Cold War was, and I don't know the answer, but this is what it was, is there was Radio Free Europe, Radio Free America, still is the BBC, there was Deutsche Welle, and they're all putting accurate news stories, trying to get them beyond the radio jamming into the rest of the world. It's just making sure, and trying to minimize the propaganda, just try to maximize the news. And part of the problem in the West, or at least in the United States, is the death of the daily newspaper. And we used to have all these little local newspapers, and then this platform called Craigslist, where you want to advertise and sell
Print
things.
media here are over.
Right. It meant that meant that the advertising that used to go on, you'd pay saying, I want to sell my car in the local newspaper. You now go to Craigslist. So then it meant local newspapers could no longer stay in business.
Because all world works faster.
Yeah, but it's a problem because you no longer, it goes up the food chain. It destroys the ability of people at a local level to generate stories of actually what's going on that would bubble up to the national level. It is taking away from Americans a shared sense of some basic facts. And there's just incredible lying going on. And one of the reasons that the Soviet Union fell is because, and it's an important reason, it's because communism required lying. In order for your enterprise to run,
and they are lying till now, all the time.
Yeah. But let's look at it. What's going on? So you have an enterprise. You lie about your inventory, saying it's less, and you lie about what you need, saying it's more, because you have to get your outputs through the plan, and you can't do market pricing because that doesn't exist. So it means everyone's lying. So then you're aggregating these statistics so that you've got. The further up the food chain you go, the less people know what the accurate statistics are. So the Soviet Union is grossly misallocating capital, labor. They don't know about what productivity is. They have no idea what consumer preferences are. And they don't figure out that they're in an unfixable mess till it's metastasized into a disaster. So this is a problem with lying. And the United States is now normalizing lying. If we all lie to each other, we're going to be basing our decisions on what is inaccurate. And Mother Nature, in fact, this is a good one for Poland. Copernicus informed people that the world was not flat. And some people were insistent that, yes, it was flat. And that didn't work out well. And because the world remains not flat. So there's a real problem. In the United States, if we continue normalizing lying and allowing our leaders to just do it flagrantly, it's another sign of precipitous national decline. And shutting down centers of research because they deliver data that you don't like. It will not change the accuracy of the data. It will absolutely cripple you on your ability to respond to it.